Don't explain your life to people who never truly understand you. There comes a season in life when a person is no longer tired because of poverty or work or heavy responsibilities, but tired because they keep having to explain themselves. Explain why they are silent. Explain why they changed. Explain why they walked away. Explain why they are no longer the same. Explain why they feel colder, quieter, harder to reach, more guarded. You speak not because you enjoy defending yourself. You speak because deep down, you still have hope. You think that if you are sincere enough, honest enough, clear enough, then people will understand. But then you realize something painful. Some people never wanted to understand you from the very beginning. They ask but not to listen. They listen but not to feel. They only wait for you to open up so they can judge, compare, conclude, and retell your story in a way that fits their own thinking. That is when you begin to understand that not everyone who enters your life deserves to enter your inner world, and not everyone who asks about you truly cares about you. Some ask out of curiosity. Some ask because they want gossip. Some ask only to check how you are living, whether you are weak or strong, whether you are okay or falling apart, so they can have something to talk about. The most painful thing is not being asked. The most painful thing is that you opened your heart, told the truth, offered a very real part of yourself, and what came back was only shallow eyes, cold advice, or an even deeper misunderstanding. You try to explain your silence, they call you proud. You try to explain your boundaries, they call you cold. You try to explain your exhaustion, they call you weak. You try to explain your dreams, they call you unrealistic. You try to explain your pain, they say you think too much. And one day you no longer know whether you are speaking to be understood or speaking just to save your image in other people's eyes. That is when a person begins to lose themselves. Because when you keep explaining your life to people who have never stepped into your pain, you are quietly giving them the right to judge what they were never qualified to touch. No one lives your life for you. No one stays awake through the nights you could not sleep. No one feels the fear you once held in your chest. No one knows what it feels like to be pushed into a corner unless they have stood there too. They only see your decision, but they do not see the years that led to that decision. They only see that you changed, but they do not see what slowly wore you down. They only see that you walked away, but they do not see how long you tried to stay. They only see your silence, but they do not see that you once spoke until your heart was empty and still no one understood. Life has a very sad truth. People often see one moment of you and think they understand your whole life. They see one mistake and use it to define you. They see you weak one time and assume you are always weak. They see you close your heart once and decide you are heartless. But a human life cannot be understood through a few broken pieces. A wound cannot be judged from the outside. A battle cannot be judged by people who never stepped onto the battlefield. And because of that, some explanations become more meaningless the more you give them. Not because your truth is unclear, but because the listener is not deep enough. Some people do not listen with the heart. They listen with prejudice, with ego, with competition, with the need to be right. No matter how much more you say, they will still choose only what fits their own thinking. That is why sometimes over-explaining is no longer sincerity. It becomes a form of self-betrayal. You start defending your life, why you quit your job, why you are not successful yet, why you are not married yet, why you distance yourself from certain people, why you need space, why you are no longer as easygoing as before, why you no longer live just to please everyone. At first you think it is normal. If someone misunderstands you, explain. If someone asks, you answer. If someone does not understand you, try to be patient. But then you realize, if someone truly wants to understand you, they will not force you to explain yourself so much. They will look at you with compassion. They will ask with gentleness. They will listen with respect. But people who enjoy misunderstanding you, the more you say, the more material they have to twist your story. That is why truly mature people do not say everything, not because they are fake, but because they have learned that not every ear is safe, not every shoulder is sincere, not every question comes from love. There are things in life that should only be spoken in places where love is present. Some pain does not need an audience. Some dreams do not need to be announced too early. Some changes need to grow in silence, because not everyone knows how to protect what is fragile inside you. You tell someone about your struggles hoping to be comforted. Then one day you hear that story being repeated somewhere else in a cold voice. You speak about your dream, hoping to be encouraged. Then one day you see that dream become a joke in the eyes of people who never had the courage to begin anything serious. You reveal your weakness, hoping to be understood, and later that very weakness is used to hurt you. And after moments like these, a person begins to learn caution, not more bitter, not more cruel, just wiser. You begin to understand that privacy is not hiding. Privacy is protection. Your inner world is sacred ground. Not everyone has the right to enter, and not everyone who enters knows how to honor it. Some people were absent when you were hurting the most. They were not there when you shattered, not there when you lost direction, not there when you had to pull yourself up alone. But when you begin to change, they become the loudest voices. They question your new boundaries. They feel uncomfortable with your new distance. They are surprised that you are no longer as easy as before. They say you are different now, as if that is a crime. But yes, you are different now. How could you not be, after everything you have been through? Pain changes your standards. Disappointment changes the way you trust people. Loss changes the way you see life. And survival changes your voice. You no longer speak the same way. You no longer trust the same way. You no longer open your heart the same way. Not because you became worse, but because you learned the price of placing your heart in the wrong hands. You do not owe anyone an apology for the person you had to become to save yourself. People often loved the version of you that endured, that tolerated, that stayed quiet, that sacrificed, that felt tired without complaining, that was hurting and still smiling. But when you begin to say no, when you begin to choose peace, when you begin to keep your distance, when you begin to set boundaries, many people will feel uncomfortable, not because you are wrong, but because your boundaries expose their carelessness. Your silence exposes their noise. Your self-respect exposes how lightly they once handled you. Your distance reminds them that access to your life was never a permanent right. So there are misunderstandings that do not need to be corrected. There are judgments that do not deserve a response. There are people who do not deserve an explanation, because you cannot use depth to speak to minds that only live on the surface. They look fast, conclude fast, judge fast, and forget fast. To them, your silence is drama. Your reflection is overthinking. Your sensitivity is weakness. Your caution is negativity. Your independence is selfishness. They always have labels for what they do not understand. And if you spend your whole life trying to explain the deepest parts of yourself to shallow minds, you will become exhausted. Not because your life is too hard to understand, but because some people never wanted to understand. They only wanted to be right. They only wanted to protect their own viewpoint, so they would never have to change. That is why the more mature a person becomes, the quieter they often become. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they learn discernment. They know where truth will be held with care, and where truth will only be torn apart. They know who deserves to hear their most honest words, and who should remain outside with their own assumptions. They understand that not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected, because there are people you can explain 10 times, and they will still choose to misunderstand you. And sometimes, silence is self-respect. There is a kind of silence that comes from fear, but there is also a kind of silence that comes from wisdom. A silence that says, I know who I am. I know what I have been through. I know what these wounds have cost me, and I no longer need anyone's permission to live truthfully in my own life. That silence is not surrender. It is peace, not weakness, but strength in its deepest form. It is when you stop chasing validation from people who were never qualified to judge you. It is when you stop placing your heart in front of people who only know how to examine it. It is when you understand that your life is not a courtroom, and you are not the defendant. You were not born to spend your whole life providing evidence for your right to live as yourself. You do not need to explain why your healing is slow. You do not need to explain why you walk alone. You do not need to explain why you are starting over late. You do not need to explain why you are tired. You do not need to explain why you need rest. You do not need to explain why you left places that made your soul wither. You do not need to explain why now you choose peace instead of noise. The moment you stop living to explain that is the moment you truly begin living with intention. You choose because it is true for you. You leave because staying there would slowly destroy you. You stay silent because your energy is limited. You open your heart carefully because your trust is something precious. That kind of life may confuse people. Let them be confused. The truth is, not everyone needs to understand you. You do not need everyone's approval to have the right to live in peace. You do not need the crowd's acceptance to have the right to keep moving forward. You do not need to shrink your truth into a few easy sentences just to fit other people's shallowness. What you need is not to be understood by everyone. What you need is not to lose yourself just because you were trying to be understood. And one day you will realize being deeply understood by a few is far more precious than being lightly accepted by hundreds. Being heard with the heart is far more valuable than being politely asked for the sake of conversation. Being beside someone who does not demand that you constantly explain yourself is far more valuable than standing in a crowd where you keep defending your own life. So, stop explaining your life to people who never truly wanted to understand you. Stop telling everything in your heart to people who only know how to listen through prejudice. Stop giving the most fragile parts of yourself to hands that do not know how to hold them gently. Speak where love exists. Open your heart where safety exists. Be honest where loyalty has already been proven by time. But in places where there is only judgment, assumption, coldness, and shallowness, choose silence. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you have grown enough to know what should be kept for yourself and what is no longer worth draining your soul for. In the end, peace does not come when the whole world understands you. Peace comes when you stop forcing yourself to be understood by people who never wanted to understand. Peace comes when you stop begging for validation from shallow eyes. Peace comes when you realize that your truth does not need permission to remain the truth. And maturity is sometimes very simple. It is knowing when to speak, knowing who to speak to, and knowing when silence is the most beautiful way to protect your heart. Remember this: you do not owe an explanation to people who never truly wanted to understand you. You do not owe them your story. You do not owe them your wounds. You do not owe them your journey. You do not owe them your exhaustion. And you certainly do not owe them the truest version of yourself. Keep that sacred part for the people who deserve it, and for those who only pass through your life to judge, to misunderstand, to distort your story. Let them remain at the distance where they belong. And you keep walking, lighter, calmer, deeper. No more defending yourself. Just live truthfully and in peace.